Welcome to the channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the bell icon to stay updated with every new story. It was just an old woman on a broken bike, shivering in the cold. Mechanic David Carter saw her crying by the roadside and offered help. His boss screamed, "She is not a paying customer. Get back to work." David fixed her bike anyway. Hours later, he was fired. The next morning, his sleepy neighborhood froze in shock. 7 all-black luxury SUVs turned into his driveway. David Carter had grease on his hands, sweat on his brow, and 1,000 worries pounding through his head. He had been working double shifts at Carter's Auto Service in the small town of Brookhaven just to keep his lights on and buy medicine for his mother. His boots were worn out. His paycheck was barely enough for rent. But David never complained. He believed in doing good, even when the world felt like it had forgotten him. That morning, the cold had crept in early. David had just begun changing oil on a pickup truck when he saw her. An elderly woman on a rusted bike, bundled in an old wool coat, struggling to pedal across the icy street. A moment later, the front wheel caught on a crack and she fell hard onto the sidewalk. Tools still in hand, David rushed out without thinking twice. She was shivering, her gray hair spilling out of her hat, eyes wide with pain and embarrassment. "Ma'am, are you all right?" David asked, gently, helping her up. Her hands were scraped, and the chain on her bike had popped off completely. She whispered, "I just needed to get to the pharmacy. My legs are not what they used to be." David nodded. "Let me fix this for you. You should not be riding alone in this cold." He guided her inside the shop where it was warm, handed her a cup of coffee from the employee pot, and began working on the bike. That was when the voice thundered through the garage. "What do you think you are doing, Carter?" It was Paul Dorsey, the shop owner. Tall, red-faced, always chewing a toothpick like. He was born angry. He looked at the woman with disgust, then at David. "You are wasting time on a piece of junk and a customer who is not even paying." David stood up slowly. "She fell outside. Her bike was broken. She is just trying to get to the pharmacy." "I do not care," Paul bellowed. "You want to play hero? Do it on your own time. We run a business here, not a charity. Get her out." David looked at the old woman, then back at Paul. "I already fixed the chain. She is leaving in a second." "You are fired," Paul snapped, pointing toward the door. "Grab your things and go." David froze. He could feel every mechanic in the room staring. No one said a word. The old woman opened her mouth, but David just shook his head. "Thank you for the coffee," she whispered. "And for your kindness." David walked out with her. No job, no backup plan. But still, he did not regret it. The next morning, the sun had barely risen when a low rumble echoed through the quiet neighborhood. David, still in his robe, stepped outside, rubbing his eyes. 7 all-black luxury SUVs turned the corner and began lining up in front of his house. The engines purred, sleek and expensive. Neighbors peeked through curtains. David's heart pounded in his chest. One of the SUV doors slowly opened, and a man in a black suit stepped out, looked at David, and said 6 words that would change everything forever. "Mr. Carter, she would like to see you." Before David could respond, the back door of the lead SUV opened. Out stepped the same elderly woman he had helped just a day before. But this time she looked like someone else entirely. Her coat was no longer worn and tattered. It was tailored, sleek, and expensive. A gold brooch sparkled on her collar. Her posture was strong, her stride graceful. She was not just an old woman anymore. She was someone powerful. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said, smiling warmly. "May I come in for a moment?" David opened the door, speechless. His living room was small and cluttered, but she did not seem to mind. She sat calmly on the couch while her security detail waited outside. David's hands trembled as he offered her tea. She declined politely. Then she reached into her bag and placed a thick file on the table. I never told you who I was, she said softly. My name is Margaret Whitmore. You may know the last name from Whitmore Technologies. We manufacture defense systems, satellite parts, and high-grade alloys for the aerospace industry. David blinked. He had heard that name before on the news and magazines. Whitmore Technologies was one of the top 5 defense contractors in the country. I was in disguise yesterday, she continued, testing something very specific. I have spent the last 3 months visiting random businesses across the country, dressed plainly, carrying no ID. I wanted to see how people treated me when they believed I had nothing to offer them. You, David, passed a test no one else has passed. You helped me without expecting anything. You were kind, respectful, and you risked your job to fix my bike. For that, I am here to change your life. David sat down, still in his robe, stunned. Margaret opened the file. Inside were documents, official, stamped, and signed. I am offering you a position as head of mechanical operations in our new research facility, 6-figure salary, full benefits, relocation package if you choose to move, and a personal workshop built to your specifications. David's eyes widened. Ma'am, I do not even have a college degree. I know, she said firmly. That is what makes your skills more impressive. Talent like yours is rare. Integrity like yours is even rarer. David was still trying to breathe normally when she stood up and walked toward the door. You have 24 hours to decide, she said, but something tells me you already have. The SUVs waited like guardians as she stepped back outside, leaving David stunned and speechless. His phone buzzed, dozens of messages from neighbors asking what had just happened. David barely slept that night. He had reread the documents a dozen times, each time more stunned than the last. A head position, a 6-figure salary, a fully equipped personal workshop. None of it made sense. And yet, it was all real. But what truly shook him was not the money. It was the way she had looked at him, like he mattered, like someone had finally seen beyond the grease on his hands and the dust on his boots. At sunrise, David walked into the shop one last time, not as a fired mechanic, but as a man with a choice. He picked up his old wrench, stared at the workbench where he had poured years of sweat and silent frustration, and whispered, "Thank you." Then he packed his few tools into a small red bag and left. As he reached home, a black car, different from the SUVs, was already parked outside. A sharply dressed woman stepped out. "Mr. Carter," she said with a polite smile, "I am Linda Hayes, personal assistant to Ms. Whitmore. She has asked me to help facilitate your onboarding process." David hesitated, still overwhelmed. "I have never worked in a corporate setting before." Linda replied smoothly, "That is exactly why Ms. Whitmore believes you belong with us. She is not hiring a resume. She is hiring a person." Linda then handed him a second envelope. "This is a sign-on bonus check. Miss Whitmore asked that you open it only if you say yes." David looked at it, heart pounding. Linda continued, "If you are ready, I will drive you to the facility so you can see what your future might look like." David took a deep breath, then nodded. "Yes, let's go." The ride was quiet, but every mile peeled away a layer of disbelief. When they arrived, David stared out the window in awe. The research center was massive, futuristic, and gleaming under the morning sun. Glass walls, solar panels, and engineers walking briskly with purpose. This was not just a job. This was a world he had never known. Inside, Margaret was waiting. She greeted him like an old friend. "Welcome, David. You made the right choice." She led him through the facility. Labs, design bays, robotic arms assembling custom parts, a testing garage with machines he had only seen in documentaries. Then she opened a private door. "This is your workshop," she said. David stepped in, and his breath caught. It was every mechanic's dream come true. Polished floors, brand new tools, diagnostic systems, and space to build, create, invent. He turned to Margaret, speechless. "Talent deserves the right environment," she said softly. "You fixed an old woman's bike like it was a priceless engine. That told me everything I needed to know." But as David looked around, one thing still tugged at him. Margaret turned before walking out. "Tomorrow you will understand everything. You were not chosen by chance." The next morning, David arrived at the research facility earlier than expected. Linda greeted him at the front desk. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. Ms. Whitmore is expecting you upstairs." He followed her through a long hallway filled with framed photographs of inventions, awards, and newspaper clippings. But one image caught his eye. It was a faded photograph of a much younger Margaret, standing beside a man who looked familiar. Worn hands, piercing eyes, the same proud posture David saw in the mirror every day. Linda paused. "You recognize him, do you not?" David nodded slowly. "That is my grandfather, Robert Carter." Linda smiled. "That photograph was taken 42 years ago. He mentored Ms. Whitmore when she was just a teenager." David stood still, stunned. His grandfather never talked much about his past. He had raised David after his parents passed away, teaching him the value of honesty, hard work, and humility, but never once mentioned mentoring a future billionaire. When David entered Margaret's office, she was standing beside a large window overlooking the facility. She turned with a gentle smile. "Your grandfather saved my life, David. Not with money, not with power, but with kindness when I had nothing." David listened in silence. "I was a 16-year-old girl who had just lost her parents. I was alone, broke, and had nowhere to go. I wandered into a junkyard crying, and your grandfather found me. He gave me food. He gave me a place to sleep. But more than that, he gave me belief. He told me I had something special in my hands, that if I learned how to build, I could change the world." David's eyes burned. The man who raised him had never asked for recognition. He just did what was right. Margaret continued, "When I built this company, I made a promise. One day, if I found someone with his hands, his heart, and his eyes, I would repay him." She walked toward a cabinet and pulled out a dusty red toolbox, placing it on the table between them. "He gave me this. I kept it all these years. It belongs to you now." David opened the box, his hands trembling. Inside were tools he recognized from childhood: wrenches, screwdrivers, an old flashlight with his initials carved into the handle. He felt the weight of memory flood his chest. "I was never able to thank him," Margaret whispered. "But through you, I can." David looked up. "You already have." She smiled. "Your journey here is only beginning. There is something else I want to show you." They walked down to a secure lower level of the facility. Finally, Margaret stopped at a thick steel door and entered a code. It opened with a hiss. Inside was a massive vehicle unlike anything David had ever seen. Sleek, aerodynamic, glowing with a soft blue light. It looked like a prototype pulled straight from the future. David stepped forward, mesmerized. "What is this?" Margaret replied softly. "This is Project Horizon. Your grandfather helped sketch the first concept of this vehicle. It was his dream to create a machine that could run forever. Clean energy, zero emissions, self-healing materials. We shelved it decades ago because the technology did not exist, but now it does." David turned to her, heart pounding. "You want me to build this?" "No," Margaret said with a smile. "I want you to lead it." The moment David accepted the challenge, a surge of determination rushed through his veins. He was no longer just a mechanic who fixed bikes in a small town. He was the keeper of a legacy that could transform the future. Margaret's presence was steady and reassuring. She believed in him with an intensity that made him believe in himself. "You will not be alone," she promised. "I will stand by you. Together, we will bring Project Horizon to life." David's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the first tool. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but it was nothing compared to the pride swelling in his chest. This was his chance to rewrite the story that began long before him. Days turned into nights as David worked tirelessly piecing together the vehicle with care and precision. He encountered obstacles that seemed impossible. But he remembered the lessons from his grandfather: patience, honesty, and unwavering belief. Every setback fueled his resolve rather than dimming it. Word began to spread quietly about the young mechanic and the revolutionary vehicle he was building. People who had once doubted him now watched with curiosity and admiration. David's transformation was not just about his skills, but about the strength that kindness and belief could build. Then came the day when the vehicle was ready for its first test. The entire team gathered in the lab, holding their breath as David ignited the engine. The vehicle hummed to life, a smooth and powerful sound that filled the room with promise. It moved forward, steady and sure, as if carrying the hopes of generations. Tears welled in David's eyes. This was not just a machine. It was a symbol of every kind act, every chance taken, and every dream that refused to die. He knew this was only the beginning. The real journey was ahead, but he was ready. Margaret smiled proudly. "You have honored your grandfather's legacy and made it your own. The world will never be the same." David looked out at the horizon, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future. He had been fired, judged, and overlooked. Yet here he stood on the brink of changing everything. The kindness he showed that day, the faith Margaret placed in him, and the strength he found within himself had led him to this moment. The road ahead was uncertain, but David was certain of one thing. He would never stop fighting, never stop believing, and never stop proving that true power lies in kindness, courage, and the will to rise.